So, Paul, did you want to talk about that question from before? Do you want to ask a question again? Just, you come here.
They have a different effect. So if you're looking at the amylose versus amyloid pectin, do you look at that in your diet as well, rather than just with the carbs?
Okay, so one thing we have to understand is dietary fibre is technically a carbohydrate. So when we talk about pectin, that's a dietary fibre. So the body does not digest that. That transits through the digestive tract undisturbed. You might get a bit of bloating at the end of it, but there's no reason for that to be digested. So if you're in America and you're actually looking at the carbohydrate content label in food, they actually include fibre within the carbohydrate count. So what you actually have to do is subtract the fibre from the carb to get the real carbohydrate content that your body processes. In Australia, we understand that pectin, indigestible, it doesn't matter. So it's irrelevant, it won't be listed on labels as carbohydrates. It's impervious to breakdown by salivary amylase or pancreatic amylase, so it really has no role. Just an addition thread to your question there, we're talking about something that's totally indigestible. When we come to sugars, we have different types of sugars. We have glucose, we have disaccharides as well, which is galactose is a combination of or lactose is a combination of galactose and glucose. So we've all heard of lactose intolerance. Now that doesn't happen at the level of the mouth where the salivary enzymes are breaking it down. It happens down at the intestinal level where you have enzymes on the inside of the intestine, and in particular we've all heard of lactase, and that breaks down this sugar, these two parts of sugar, one part glucose, one part galactose, and splits it open so you can then absorb those individual sugars across your intestine. If you don't have lactase, then you're lactose intolerant, and every time you have that drink of milk, you're not very pleasant to be around. So I guess when we're talking about different kinds of carbohydrates and their breakdowns, let's put them into different categories. There's a few of them individually, like milk sugar, that you need special enzymes, and we know a large proportion of the world, especially the Asian population, will be deficient in some of those. But for something like pectin, it's pretty much irrelevant because that's dietary fibre, and by definition, that's indigestible.
All right, so there was a question out the back. Yep.
Yes. So if you're...
So just repeat the question for those of you that didn't hear.
Okay,
Is there an optimal amount of water to drink?
So we now know, this might not be the best forum to talk about it, given that it's possibly got some industry sponsorship, maybe from electrolyte beverages.
Keep it simple, Paul. Keep it simple and keep it short. We want to get through a lot of questions. So
okay.
What's the short
optimal
answer?
amount of water, drink to thirst. Our body regulates itself perfectly well. This drink 2 litres a day is bollocks. There is no science to that at all, and that's the short answer.
But the interesting thing is if you're not drinking enough salt on this diet, because your insulin's low and you're weeing out all your sodium, you'll actually get thirstier. And the solution in some of the situations is not to drink more water, but in fact to have more salt. All right. Yep.
You mentioned before that the artificial sweeteners is a gateway. I don't recommend those, but I've found recommending the ketogenic diet the hardest thing. No one judges the effects. Everyone knows that's great. But the social element is in 20 grams or 50 grams is too low for me, with my lifestyle. And so I found the caffeine-free version of that keto OS to be effective. On clients, would you...
But what's your goal, though? What's your goal? Are you just trying to get your blood ketones higher, or are you trying to get the metabolic benefits of being in ketosis from the processing of the body?
Well, the latter is the end goal. I'm just saying, for undisciplined or people that...
So let's just cut to the chase. So if you want the metabolic benefits of breaking down fat and forming your own ketones, then if you're taking extra ketones into the body, it has a negative feedback pathway. So the body says, as Doron said earlier in his lecture, there's lots of ketones here, we don't need to break our fat down to generate more, therefore we stop. If you're an elite athlete trying for an extra performance boost, that's a whole different equation, and that's something that I do with my athletes very differently. But in terms of what we're talking about today, good metabolic health, then we don't recognise or we don't recommend exogenous ketones.
Yep.
You mentioned before about just like having one piece of fruit a day.
No, I didn't say one piece of fruit a day, all right? That's definitely not what I said. Fruit is seasonal, right? Fruit should only be around when the sun is shining. And there's some evidence that vitamin D actually helps protect you from the negative effects of the fruit. So you should really only be eating fruit when it's seasonal and for a short period of time, and then not eating it again for months at a time. We've got fruit available all the time, every day, and that's a bad way of eating fruit. So I'm not saying fruit by itself is bad, we're just eating it far too often and far too much.
So having 2 or 3 pieces of fruit.
Every single day is a disaster because you're not eating it seasonally.
So we also need to nuance this a little bit.
Yeah.
If you actually have a look at fruit, then there's lots of varying degrees in the amount of sugar within that fruit. Avocado, fantastic. Cucumber, brilliant. Tomato, no problems. Then we come down into the berries, raspberries, blackberries, strawberries, fine. Except then you have a look at blueberries, and that's at least 12% sugar. So not all fruit is equal.
Yeah. So, and it also, again, depends what your goal is, all right? So you have to understand, because we've got people that are trying to lose weight stall, and it's because they're eating, a bowl full of blueberries, which just has too much sugar for them. Yeah?
Absolutely.
So I'll just repeat the question. Do different people from different areas, South Pacific, Asia, Europe, have different dietary effects? So you can
So the
answer
answer is
some of it,
absolutely.
but keep it short. There's more questions.
So it all comes down to insulin resistance. When you saw the graph of insulin resistance that treks along the pathway, somebody who's an islander will start a lot further along that pathway, or they'll progress down that pathway a lot quicker.
Yep.
So their natural hunter-gatherer diet is not reflected in the Australian diet, so they absolutely have a much lower threshold for carbohydrates.
I mean, even you look at a population like Brazil, which used to have very low diabetes rates. It's now amongst the highest in the world. They're skyrocketing because they now have more money, they can buy more sugar. And that's what's happened. The sugar consumption in that country is massively increased. Sucrose, fructose plus glucose, they're getting all the metabolic problems. Yep.
Might sound a bit I wrote a book and I was saying how insane is a lot of celiac disease and weight problems. And around the same in this book, it was saying that the chemical makeup of wheat has changed to grow shorter and have yield more each crop, which has actually changed the chemical makeup of the plant, which is causing our bodies to not digest it and reject it, which is why all of a sudden now we're having so many more cases of it.
Okay. The answer to that is yes, and it was designed by the World Health Organization to do that, and it was done in Mexico. They genetically modified all of the products, so the answer to your question is yes. Yep.
Well, I've got 2 questions. My first one is there a different response with male and female sex hormone? And is there a sex hormone response on a ketogenic diet? So females...
Yes and yes. So the question is there a hormone difference between males and females, and how is that impacted by the ketogenic diet? So with females, we know that insulin has a big impact on sex hormone binding globulins, basically chemicals that will bind to estrogen and testosterone. So we don't have much time to elaborate on this, unfortunately, but if we
will stay around afterwards if anyone wants to have a chat individually.
If we improve your insulin levels, we then improve your sex hormone binding globulin levels, and you'll end up with differential effects of your sex hormones. And for females, yes, the natural state of a female is that you need to support lots of fat for pregnancies and supporting a baby. So it is instinctively, it makes logical sense. It's harder for females to lose weight, and we absolutely see that in the clinic in terms of the average weight loss. It's probably about 60% less for some females.
Having said that, though, the results in people with polycystic ovarian syndrome on this diet are fantastic, and that's again a hormonal effect. And there are things that if women are postmenopausal, adding some of the estrogens to them can help a lot. And my sort of personal experience from the people that I know, most of the people that around the time of their period say they feel a lot less premenstrual and get a lot less period pain. But that's not science. That's just people that have been talking to me about it, telling me how wonderful it is. Yeah.
Oh, I just wondered, a ketogenic diet, or the system that you're using, can you comment on autoimmune disorders? And with that membrane that you're saying 3-4 years to have it changed, if someone you have an experience with, or would you theorise that someone who was on that sort of diet for 3 or 4 years would, with an autoimmune disorder, get a substantial improvement?
Absolutely. But I'll let Paul answer that, because we have a rheumatologist that sends us patients, right? Patients with joint diseases. So
the question is about autoimmune effects and the ketogenic diet. So this relates to an earlier question regarding the makeup of wheat. So it comes down to what we do know is that if our gut is unhealthy, it's called the leaky gut hypothesis, the cells have gaps in them, we then get exposed to different chemicals that we're not normally being exposed to, and through the concept of molecular mimicry, which is where our body sees something and it says, that's bad, I'm going to develop an immune response against that, and that just so happens to be very similar to a natural tissue in our body, and in some people would call that a seronegative spondyloarthropathy, or basically a fancy type of arthritis. Now, we know that the proteins in wheat, the gliadin protein, it's found in barley, rye and wheat, that can precipitate this kind of reaction, and I see it in the clinic every week, where people who have joint pain, we go on a gluten-free diet, which is basically a low-carb diet like this. It takes out gluten and their joint pains resolve. And there's an increasing amount of supportive data for that in the literature.
What about something like ankylosing spondylitis?
That's the seronegative spondyloarthropathy.
Yeah,
that's in that same class.
Yep.
Can being lactose intolerant be a sign of insulin resistance?
No. So lactose intolerance is a sign that you don't have this enzyme lining your intestine. Separate issue.
Yeah.
So will this sort of thing help postmenopausal women with the still going through the physical effects of menopause, like the flushes and the night sweats and
No, that problem is a lack of estrogen. Your ovaries are sort of.
yeah.
That this doesn't reverse the effects of menopause.
Although if you
it's harder to work for them.
no, hang on. Yes and no. You see, it depends. There's not a lot of science behind that. There's a lot of blogs and Facebook pages and stuff like that, and you'll get differing opinions all the time. Very hard to produce the science. But we do know that in postmenopausal women, as I said before, adding estrogens to them can help them with their weight loss. Yep.
Fish and reluctant to fish or won't eat fish at all, and children won't eat fish. Omega-3, so I'm suggesting they then eat more fish, but also looking at the actual tackling omega-3 says some people saying no, that's just a waste of money.
Okay, so the question.
So yeah, you want to repeat the question?
So the question is how to help children and people who don't like fish get enough omega-3, and is there an actual real benefit? So if I look at the single most important blood test to predict all-cause mortality, it's the omega-3 index. The one that Doron showed before, the ratio of omega-3s versus omega-6 in the cell membrane. If we break people into 4 groups, the lowest group and the highest group, the group with the highest amount has 10 times less risk of heart attacks than the other group. And that's been demonstrated twice in published studies in the New England Journal of Medicine and the Journal of the American Medical Association, 2 prospective studies. They're very good journals. I don't know why it hasn't been more widely promulgated throughout the medical profession, but yes, omega-3 really does have that much benefit. And if they don't want to eat fish, then your only alternative is to supplement.
And there are ways. Like there are lots of kid recipes out there. There's a million out there. You know, you can basically make them almost like a schnitzel, but using almond meal or coconut flour or things like that, so that you disguise it. You can cook it into other veggies and things like that. I mean, like I said, my kids are low carb. They just don't know it. That's the food that they get, and it's totally fine. It takes them a little while to adjust to it, but they adjust very, very quickly. And there's a lot of recipe sites out there that can help you do it. And there are sort of kid-level fish oils that are available as well.
And on supplement for adults, if they would not eat fish at all, how much do you recommend per day?
That's a question that I weigh up individually. So I'm very reluctant to give an amount in a public forum where I don't know if you've got a bleeding dyscrasia, I don't know if you're taking other medications.
But assuming you're generally healthy.
I will tell you the Australian guideline says to take up to 3,000 milligrams a day. European guidelines will allow you to take up to 5,000 a day.
But we're probably a bit high, from what we believe anyway. Yeah.
Alright guys, sorry to be a spoil sport. I would love to let everybody stay here for another 3 hours, but we gotta cut it short to the next
Okay.
So please, thank you all.